minutes this hour from there. Let's go overtime. Right now, I'm Harris Faulkner. President Trump about to meet with Republican leaders and members of the House Ways and Means Committee after they unveiled their long-awaited tax plan. Plus, the White House daily briefing with Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. In addition to taxes, we expect to hear more administration reaction to the New York City terror attack, as President Trump is calling for the suspect now to face the death penalty. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is covering all of this for us, and all of us, I might say, from the North Lawn. Good to see you.
We have a broad blanket to throw on America. Good afternoon to you, Harris. You know, it's rare for a president to weigh in on what he thinks potential criminal penalties should be, but this is a president who has never been one to be bound by convention, and President Trump making it clear what he thinks should happen to the New York City killer in a tweet this morning saying, quote, New York City terrorist was happy as he asked to hang ISIS flag in his hospital room. He killed 8 people, badly injured 12, should get death penalty. Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders says the president does consider the killer to be an enemy combatant, but the United States has not officially declared him as such, for the moment at least, keeping him in the criminal justice system. That did not sit well with South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, who ripped the White House in a statement saying, quote, I appreciate President Trump taking the gloves off when it comes to unleashing our military on ISIL. However, I'm dumbfounded as to why the Trump administration still follows the Obama playbook when it comes to dealing with terror suspects. If there was ever a candidate to be held as an enemy combatant for intelligence gathering purposes, it is Saifullah Saipov, a self-declared soldier of the caliphate. The president also taking some heat for jumping right into the political fray yesterday, taking aim at Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, for his support of the diversity visa lottery program back in 1990. That was the program that allowed Saipov to come into the country. Senator Schumer yesterday taking to the floor of the Senate basically to accuse the president of failed leadership in the aftermath. Listen here.
President Trump, instead of politicizing and dividing America, which he always seems to do at times of national tragedy, should be bringing us together and focusing on the real solution, anti-terrorism funding, which he proposed to cut in his most recent budget.
Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that the president was merely talking about policy here, was not jumping into the political fray, and jumped to his defense yesterday afternoon in the briefing. Listen here.
Look, this wasn't about going the political route. This is something that, frankly, the president's been talking about for a long time. This isn't a new policy. This isn't a new position. This isn't a new conversation. The president has been talking about extreme vetting and the need for that for the purpose of protecting the citizens of this country since he was a candidate, long before he was ever president.
But the fact that the president jumped into the political fray, even the policy fray, just hours after this attack stands in sharp contrast to his response to that mass shooting in Las Vegas a couple of weeks back, Harris. I remember days after that, even when he was on his way to Las Vegas to meet with some of the survivors and family members of some of the victims, he wouldn't even weigh in on policy questions, let alone politics. But yesterday, after this terror attack, jumped right into the political fray and tore a strip off of Chuck Schumer. We'll hear more about this in about 25 minutes' time when Sarah Huckabee Sanders takes to the podium, as well, I'm certain, lots of questions about tax cuts. And then, of course, this afternoon, the expected announcement of Jerome Powell to be the new Fed chairman.
Wow, some UFC terms. Did you say tore a strip off of Chuck Schumer?
Yes,
you did.
I did.
John Roberts, thank you very much. Let's bring in Fox News contributor and the former press secretary for President George W. Bush, Ari Fleischer. Ari, always good to see you. I want to hit a couple points. Let's start with the president and this idea that some are accusing him of getting into politics because of what he put out on the death penalty with a bloodthirsty suspect. We'll put bloodthirsty in quotes because he hasn't been tried yet on Twitter. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I don't think he's getting into politics. I do think he's getting in the business of the Justice Department and an upcoming trial. And, I'm old-fashioned on this, Harris. I believe in that blindfolded lady who holds a scale of justice, and you don't know which side the government is on other than for a fair trial. And that's why I objected when President Obama weighed in and talked about whether the IRS targeted conservatives, which was a pending judicial matter, when he came in on Hillary's side about the email investigation, which was a judicial matter. Presidents are best to stay out of those matters and leave it to the Justice Department. If a president wants to weigh in, he should weigh in by category. If somebody commits terrorism in the United States, I believe in the death penalty. But I think presidents are better off not commenting on specific cases.
Well, those were interesting examples, too. I mean, this is a bipartisan type of situation because you're talking about somebody who has a different voice than the rest of us. He's got the bully pulpit. And what I understand you to be concerned about, Ari, is that, well, if they would request a change of venue, well, where would that be if it's the president of the United States? Where would that be? So I get that. Let's move on to taxes. Oh, did you have a last word?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Let's talk about taxes. So you saw them roll out in the 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern hour today,
yes.
The Republicans. On first blush, your comments.
Wonderful. If you're a Republican, if you're somebody who believes in growth, if you want this economy to boom again, today is a big day and an important one. It also shows that elections matter, and the fact that Republicans can get this signed into law is a significant moment for the country and for growth. So I like what I've seen. I've been trying to pour into the details of it, and I think the details are actually very pro-growth, and they've been creative in what they've done to pay for some of these tax cuts. I like it.
All right. So now I want to get to something that the president just rolled out. I'm sure you were watching. He made that huge jobs announcement just moments ago, and alongside him, he had a man by the name of Hock Tan. He is the CEO of a company called Broadcom, and they're now going to leave Singapore and come, as he said, making America home again, that Mr. Tan said. He said they're going to bring that company back in and bring with it billions of dollars. This was an interesting time for the president because at first he said he might roll something out after he got back from Asia next week, but now he took the opportunity to do it on this day.
You know, the economy has been strong on paper, but there's something that's been missing, and that is rising wages, particularly for middle-income workers. If you get this economy to boom again, that is going to happen. It'll be the best thing to happen to people who work for a living, who struggle for a living. And as more jobs come back from overseas, all of this creates pressure on the job market, and that's what blue-collar workers need the most. Job pressure to get their wages up. It's been 10 years for most middle-income people and working people to have a pay raise. So with this announcement, combined with what tax reform can do, is just what the economy needs so it does boom again. And that's something all Americans benefit from. This is significant.
So I hit you kind of press secretary style, which is kind of the top moments here, if you will. And the reason that I do that is because this hour we're expecting to see Sarah Sanders at the lectern. And this will be wide-ranging, as it always is. So we're going to revisit that first topic because you know reporters are going to lean in hard on this. And will it be the politics or anything else that you think will come up with the fact that we have, and I had a guest call it yesterday, a unicorn on a rainbow and capturing somebody alive after a terror hit, the second deadliest in New York City since 9/11. So my question for you, Ari, I think our picture froze up there for a second. Are you still with us? Okay.
I'm still with you. I hear you clear.
My question for you has to do with, those questions for Sarah Huckabee Sanders. What do you think the White House now, where should they posture? Because you've got these tweets out there, and we talked about that momentarily.
Look, I told you my position on this, and I think that's where the president should have been. He's obviously not there. President Trump runs the federal government almost like he is still an outsider. It's one of his strengths, it's one of his weaknesses. It's a strength because people get to see what side he's on, who is he fighting for, what does he believe in. As the person who runs the government, though, there are consequences to the things that he says that makes it harder in some instances to have good government. So if I'm Sarah today, I make the case that the president's letting his opinion be clear. Everybody knows this is where the president stands, and she should probably assert that when it comes to a trial, this won't have any impact. If any defense lawyer tries to get this guy off because of what the president said, no one's going to fall for it. That's what I'd say if I'm Sarah. But again, I'm pure about these things, Harris. I do think there's a right way and a wrong way procedurally to be the president. I think you're stronger, and I criticize President Obama for it, criticize President Trump for it, not weighing in on specific judicial matters.
Yeah, and one thing that was brought up real quickly was this diversity visa program. The president leaned in hard on that, and we're learning much more about it. And this idea of chain immigration, where somebody coming into this country who's come in on a lottery situation and is vetted to some degree, that was bringing people with them. I want to just get a quick last thought from you on that.
Yeah, when you compare it to what happened in Las Vegas, obviously Democrats want to immediately go to gun control. Republicans in this case, or President Trump wants to immediately go to immigration changes. I think that's a fair debate to have. Let whoever has the majority votes prevail. We should take a look at immigration in the wake of this attack. Are there changes that can be made? Diversity program. Let's look at it carefully. Let's learn more about it. I don't rule out that change. I think merit-based immigration has merits. But I still want to make sure we're a welcoming country and we vet people, but people who want to come here make us a stronger country, and we should do everything we can to keep out people, obviously, who would do us harm.
Ari Fleischer, thank you very much. Great to see you.
Thank you, Harris.
Well, as we await President Trump's meeting with members of the House Ways and Means Committee after they unveiled their long-awaited proposal, let's drill down a bit on some of the details that we learned today. Under the plan, the average family would save nearly $1,200 a year. It would keep the current rules for 401k retirement plans intact. Remember, that was a sticking point. And it would cut corporate tax rate from 35% to 20% permanently. It also retains state and local property tax deductions, but caps them at $10,000. And it would shrink the number of tax brackets to 12 to 25, 35, and 39.6%. Meanwhile, and you can look at your screen for some of the details on this too. I encourage you to do that. If you're looking away, look up, because that is the plan there. Might even snap a copy of it in case you want to look at it later. President Trump, though, is sticking to his aggressive timetable. Watch this.
And I really believe we'll have it done before Christmas. I consider that to be one of the great Christmas presents. And not just the reform and not just the tax cuts, but we will be creating jobs like you have rarely seen.
A Christmas present, he says. Let's bring in Congressman David Schweikert of Arizona. He's a member of the Ways and Means Committee and a House Freedom Caucus member. Good to have you, sir, along for it.
I'm picturing putting a bow ribbon on the tax bill.
Is that how it's going to be?
You know, it might as well, because it really is a gift to the American people, and particularly those, you know, I have a 2-year-old, you know, her future in being in a country that's growing and has lots of economic opportunity.
All right, there are a couple of criticisms that are already coming, and I'd like to hit you with those so maybe we can make sense of some of the language. So some of the New York and New Jersey and even left coast Republican leaders are saying that this does not do enough with those state and local tax deductions. One in particular we've had on the program is Representative Lee Zeldin of New York. You say?
Oh, sure. Look, the tax code has lots and lots of things in them that we're removing because they don't create economic expansion. And the modeling is very, very clear. Many people like to take the deductions for state and local income tax, property tax. It's for those who itemize, so it's only for the 1/3 that actually itemize. But it creates almost no economic growth, for the cost of those resources are no longer now in tax cuts. It's a decision of, do you try to do something that's fair for everyone across the country, or do you functionally subsidize those jurisdictions that spend a lot of money and tax their residents a lot?
Interesting. All right, we have a senior source who's telling Fox News that the deficit impact of the tax bill might be higher than $1.5 trillion. And if that's the case, because you know you've got to stay there in order to just have a majority vote. If that's true, because we heard Kevin Brady say today that it might be north of that a little bit. If that's true, what do you do? Because that means you'll need Democrats.
No, actually, in the Senate, you'd need Democrats. We will get the math at the 1.5 because we have to.
Okay.
But the math there is, are we a tiny bit over? Is there so much variance in some of the math that comes back? But there are some dials we can do up and down when either something expires or the extension of certain types of credits or deductions. We'll make the $1.5 trillion because we don't have a choice. We, in the House Ways and Means Committee, have to hit these numbers to meet the reconciliation rules of the Senate. So this is the stuff that drives the American people crazy. And we understand because it drives us nuts, too.
So you bring up a great, though, indication. You didn't make this point, but you indicated, and I had a question, so does that mean that the Senate bill is going to be all that different from what you've worked on? Because they do have their own plan.
Oh, yeah. And look, we still have to work through a lot of very technical details, particularly on the international. You know, we've sort of set up this, the mechanisms to finally be competitive in the world, but we also want to make sure we have language that we don't get cheated as a country. So that's going to require some very smart drafting. We're going to have to work through that. And then the Senate is often a very different animal. We will expect the Senate to have certain moments of vanity where they're going to want to have their input, but that's just the process. That's the way
I love
it's
your
supposed
words.
to work.
Different animal, vanity. It's so soft. Makes it sound so friendly. I bet it's going to be tougher than that. Real quickly. Well,
it's
okay.
always hard.
It's always hard. Broadcom is coming back from Singapore to America.
Yeah.
How does it help to have the president do something like that, make that kind of announcement on a day in which you're trying to get tax cuts, and a portion of that is, a big portion of it is repatriating dollars from outside of the United States by lowering the corporate tax rate?
I think it's really powerful because, remember, this tax reform is so much more than just tax cuts. This is designed to create economic growth. Look, as a society, we have trillions and trillions and trillions of unfunded liabilities, of promises we've made to our seniors and others, and we don't have the money. The only way we can get close to it is we must grow economically. And that means American businesses have to stop leaving our country and moving their headquarters overseas. If this demonstrates that by fixing the problems in our tax code, businesses from around the world are coming back home, it's a great message.
Yeah. All right, we appreciate your time so very much on this day in which your committee, sir, is at the center of the universe, tax cuts. Thank you.
You're very kind.
much. Appreciate it. Coming up, we are live outside the home of the New York City terror attack suspect. Investigators are piecing together the making of that deadly plot in Lower Manhattan. Meanwhile, the debate is raging from the Capitol to the White House and beyond. How should the government label that suspect? Criminal or enemy combatant? The difference could determine what's right and what rights he has going forward, as well as the information authorities can get from him. But one question looms large. How will justice best be served? Stay close.
If you take up arms against the United States in the name of radical Islam, you should be treated as a terrorist. The law does allow you to treat a terrorist differently than a common criminal. Declaring this man as an unlawful enemy combatant would allow the government to hold him, and it doesn't have to be at Gitmo.
Fox News alert now. Police are stepping up their investigation into the New York City terror attack and the suspect. Authorities have scoured the home of 29-year-old Uzbek immigrant who allegedly plowed a truck onto a crowded bicycle path on Tuesday and killed 8 people, injured many others. Police say it was all done in the name of ISIS. Laura Ingle is live outside the suspect's home in Paterson, New Jersey with the latest. Laura?
Hi, Harris. Well, it's certainly been a very active morning. Investigators returned here to this red brick apartment complex you see here behind me, talking with neighbors and basically door knocking the entire neighborhood, going across the street, trying to talk to folks who live right here in Paterson. Now, they came in a pack, going door to door and across the street, and we saw them take one neighbor from the apartment complex from one floor to the basement level to show them around, clearly interested in the surrounding apartments where Sayfullo Saipov lived with his wife and children in apartment number 9. Now, one man whose grandmother lives next door to this complex says their family often had seen Saipov with other men at the complex, but not in apartment number 9. They often could see him through the window in apartment number 1. So often, in fact, they actually thought that that is where Saipov lived, which could explain today's activity with investigators. Saipov is known to live in apartment number 9, but you believe he was also living in 1 or spent a lot of time in apartment 1?
Yeah, from my knowledge and from, speaking to people and what I've seen, like that night when everything happened, everybody here in this house next door, we all thought apartment 1. Nobody knew apartment 9. Yesterday when I found out it was apartment 9, that's where I was like a little confused.
A lot of people wondering about that. We also want to share with you another new development coming from a neighbor 2 doors down. Take a look at this photo. It was obtained by FoxNews.com showing a black car in a driveway. Take a look in the street behind the black car. Carlos Batista, the neighbor who took this, tells us that flatbed Home Depot truck was driven by Saipov just last week. This photo taken on October 22nd, and that he saw Saipov with a similar truck talking with 2 men outside of his home several times over the last few weeks. He says it's been about 3 weeks he has seen them with this type of truck. And at the time he thought it was odd because he knew he wasn't moving or he worked in construction. And now, of course, learning it was this type of vehicle used in the Halloween truck attack in New York City has given him a great sense of sadness, he says. Investigators have said they believe that Saipov had made several dry runs, and now at least one neighbor here in Paterson has given them a key piece of evidence that could support that part of the story. We continue to monitor the activities here at this apartment complex, and we'll bring you the latest as we have it develop here. Harris.
Laura Ingle, thank you very much. Meanwhile, the suspect was charged in civilian court yesterday, despite the White House saying he should be considered an enemy combatant and possibly sent to Guantanamo Bay. But President Trump this morning tweeted this: "We love to send the New York City terrorist to Guantanamo, but statistically that process takes much longer than going through the federal system. There is also something appropriate about keeping him in the home of the horrible crime he committed. Should move fast. Death penalty, exclamation point." GOP Senator Lindsey Graham says he disagrees with that decision, while a Democratic House Intel member says jurors should decide his fate. Watch.
I had 8 years of this. I don't want 4 more of it. They clearly weren't prepared for this day. They had no idea what to do differently than Obama. They're playing exactly like President Obama did.
Let him face 12 New Yorkers. I trust the American juror. I was a prosecutor before coming to Congress, and I still believe that the American criminal justice system is the best in the world. And let him spend the rest of his life in jail.
Steve Rogers is a former member of the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, a retired lieutenant detective for the Nutley, New Jersey Police Department as well. I want to start with something that some people may find a little surprising, and that is you've got a whole ramp up as to why this person needs to be an enemy combatant. You say we're at war with a military.
Well, let's take a look at a timeline that no one seems to be talking about, Harris. About a year or so ago, ISIS said that they're going to send their military fighters here. Maybe not necessarily from there, but they're obviously radicalizing them here, number one. Number two, we knew a long time ago, we the intelligence community knew a long time ago that because of President Trump's extraordinary policies in decapitating ISIS in the Mideast, the war was going to be taken from the sands of the Mideast to the streets of America. Therefore, you have now enemy combatants in this country looking to destroy us.
So it's an interesting premise, because what you're saying is, and when you think about Guantanamo Bay, you're taking people from the battlefield and putting them here. What you're talking about is a shifting battlefield. Am I understanding that right?
Absolutely right. And the warriors are not necessarily, obviously, military here in the United States, but our homeland warriors are our police. So the president is absolutely right. Look, the White House said there should be enemy combatants. The president articulated the frustration of the American people because the process doesn't seem to be working well with regard to enemy combatants.
You know, we had on Ari Fleischer moments ago, and we've had others tell us here on Fox News that perhaps it's not the best thing for the president to be on Twitter, but what you're looking at is the messaging specifically about enemy combatant, and you don't have a problem with that.
Not at all. We're at war, and the president early on realized we were at war, and this is why he's taking that stand, and it's a stand that we should have taken a long time ago. So we need to understand that we're at war and that we have to have wartime strategies to defeat this enemy.
You say this is not a criminal act, but it is.
No, it's not a criminal act insofar as when you see someone committing a violent crime because of workplace violence. Remember, Harris, this person was trained as an enemy combatant to take us down.
So at your level, studying anti-terrorism, how does this change the game in terms of what they're doing? Because we've seen this all over Europe. We've seen it now in this country, using vehicles to go after people. This is not something that you can stick a piece of legislation on. And what, are we going to keep people from renting cars? I mean, what do we do?
What we have to do is begin to think about adding more and more law enforcement officers on the streets, all right? We need an increase in human intelligence assets. We did that with the mob. We did that with organized crime. Eyes on suspects. Eyes on suspects.
Yeah, so the pushback on that usually is, and often is, that, oh, you don't want to look like a militarized zone with people, in uniform and with weapons on our streets, so on and so forth. But what you're saying, though, is we've done this in this country before, and it worked for those times that we needed it to. Are you calling for a short-term burst? What would it look like?
Look, we've done it before, but go to Israel. I was in Israel, and there are undercover agents all over the place. You wouldn't know the guy on the beach sitting next to you is watching the guy over there.
Yeah, like a marshal on a plane.
Exactly. We're not going to become a military state here, but we have to become a country that will increase situational awareness, and we're great when it comes to electronic intercepts, etc., but we need eyes on suspects. People always ask, why do they fall through the cracks? There's not enough manpower to follow everyone.
You've been dealing with this for decades, Steve. Have we reached any sort of a tipping point? Are you more concerned now than ever? Because we are taking it to them. wiping out members of ISIS and any terrorist group that we can get our hands on in the Middle East. I mean, we took out Raqqa, Syria, where those scorpions were nesting. That has a reverberation effect here at home.
Let me tell you something, Harris. The FBI, our intelligence agencies are doing a great job. This is the first time since 9/11 that we've had such a casualty count. But under this president, I could tell you he's committed to the war on terrorism, and we beat him in the Mideast. We're going to beat him here.
Steve Rogers, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. A Fox News alert on a busy day at the White House now. One, we are awaiting President Trump's meeting with Republican House leaders following today's tax reform plan rollout. Also, Sarah Sanders will be holding the daily briefing set to start in a matter of minutes, where she's expected to be joined by National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster. And later, the president will announce his nominee to be the next Federal Reserve Chair. A lot going on. Stay close. With Sarah Sanders getting ready to talk about President Trump's meeting with members of the House Ways and Means Committee. Of course, we know that that's going on right now. And this comes after House Republicans unveiled their long-awaited tax reform plan, which you saw live right here on Fox News. Preserving popular retirement accounts, that was one of the sticking points. 401ks won't be touched. Cutting the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20% permanently. And under the plan, a family of four earning the median household income, which was $59,000 that we learned from Representative Brady. And that's a savings of nearly $1,200 in taxes per the cut. Here's Committee Chairman Brady right now.
But let's not let Washington special interests, the TV pundits, or the pessimists fool you. None of them thought we'd even get this far with tax reform, and they're wrong. Now, working together with President Trump, our colleagues in the House and Senate, and you, the American people, we're going to prove them wrong once and for all by getting pro-growth tax reform to the president's desk this year.
Rolling it out earlier today. Now let's talk about it. Joining me now back from the Outnumbered couch, former State Department spokesperson Marie Harf, Ned Ryan, the CEO of American Majority and the former presidential writer for President George W. Bush. Always good to have you both.
Thanks, Harris.
Welcome back, Marie.
TV pundits. Chairman Brady doesn't like us, but we're going to talk taxes.
You know what? Let's get deep into it here, because I'm reading word that there are some Republicans who are going to vote no, just like they did on the budget a week ago, over some certain issues having to do with deducting your local and state taxes.
That's right. No, that's the big sticking point, especially for the Northeastern Republicans, who I think it was 12 of them that voted against this in the House budget.
12 of the 20 no votes against the budget.
That's right. We're Northeast Republicans.
Yeah.
Right, but 12 of them were from the Northeast because of this very issue. I'm encouraged that they made the corporate tax permanent, that they want to make them permanent. I'm encouraged that they're taking the small business from 40 to 25%, and there are a lot of other positives as well. What I'm concerned about is there are only 21 days left on the congressional calendar. So I am not terribly optimistic that we will see something happen this year on tax reform.
You don't think it's going to be a Christmas gift?
No, I don't, actually, because let's look back at this. The ones that are saying they're going to vote against it, they screwed up health care. I think there's the potential. They're having trouble organizing a one-car parade at this point.
Not all of the people who voted no on the budget were the people who voted no on health care. So that actually is...
Which makes it even more problematic.
But, and you can only lose 22. You can only lose 22. So you say they're 21 days. That means you have to convince almost a person every day.
And they have other things they need to get done. This is obviously a huge agenda item.
Well, they can multitask.
We haven't seen them able to do that this year very well.
So.
But this is the thing. We haven't seen all the details quite yet. But this is not a slam dunk for the Republican caucus. You are absolutely right. And what we talked about on Outnumbered and what you mentioned earlier in the show, where they may not be able to fast track in the Senate, there is no way it gets through the Senate if that's the case.
So let's not get too much in the weeds, but I do want to talk about that for just a second, Ned, if we can break it down for people. So there's a certain amount that you can accrue as debt as you push this forward.
All right,
1.5 trillion is the amount. If you go over that, it means you either have to find some ways to get the number back down. We're talking specifically about the Senate. So
Senate side.
Weikart, the congressman earlier with me. So your thoughts?
That's very problematic. They're going to have to figure out, because there's no way they're going to get 60 votes right now.
So
the current structure. So you've got to keep it. You've got to keep it the majority vote. You've got to be able to get to at least 50, so Mike Pence could come in and break it.
Why did it pop up above 1.5 million?
They can't figure the math out. And trillion, right. And this is the thing. This isn't exactly what President Trump has been asking for. I've heard him talk about very different formulation for tax reform. I don't think he's probably totally thrilled today with this.
We don't know, but
the thing that worries me about this going into 2018, my dad was in Congress for 10 years. You get into an election year, and any small amount of courage they might have had just disappears in an election year. So I think when you get to some really hard choices that they might have to take on this, we're going to go into 2018 on this. It becomes problematic.
That's an interesting point. And you know, when you talk about the cost of things too, we've had a really costly year. We've had crises, hurricanes. We've had a lot happen. So we don't know what the future holds, and that can sometimes inform the conversation too. I want to move on to something that has to do with them actually moving forward with this, though. The Senate's going to have their own version. And so my question for Congressman Schweikert today, and nobody knows because we haven't seen it yet, but are we optimistic that those versions are close? Because if they're not, that also pushes forth your timeline.
Right. No, you've got to go. A bill has to go through the House, then it has to go through the Senate. If the bills are not similar, they've got to go to conference. Then they've got to go repass the bills through the House and the Senate before it gets to Trump's desk. And so when I say there's only 21 days left, if they are not the exact same bill in the House and the Senate, you've just extended that runway. Who knows how long?
And we have to
if
keep
they get it done, though,
funded,
Democrats are in trouble in 2018.
Absolutely. The ability this will have, to really ramp up the economy, 3.5% to 4% GDP, giving money back to the middle class.
We'll could even go to 5, I'm hearing, but that's way optimistic.
I'll be happy with 4.
That was my question. Are average Americans going to feel this?
No, I do think so. No, I'm glad because listen, most small business owners, I would define as small business. Most of them are middle class. This will benefit the middle class from 40 to 25%. It could be huge.
All right, this is as friendly as it's probably going to get. Because you know what? The DNC former chair, remember the one who was feeding those debate questions to Hillary Clinton? She just wrote a book. She's taking a swipe at everybody. Stay close. House press briefing with Sarah Sanders.
A lot of days like this together over the next couple of weeks since we'll be traveling. But for those of you on the trip, I look forward to seeing you. For those of you that aren't, we're going to certainly miss all of you and your questions. It's a busy day here at the White House, like most days here. As you all saw, the president was excited to announce the Broadcom Limited is coming back to the United States, moving their company back here from Singapore. Their CEO credited the president's economic agenda for once again making the United States the best place in the world to grow a business. He also noted that the tax reform plan, which was rolled out this morning, will make it easier for them and other companies to do exactly what the president has promised. Bring back our jobs, bring back our wealth, and bring back our great American dreams. This morning, the president applauded the House Ways and Means Committee for introducing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is another important step toward providing massive tax relief for the American people. Our entire administration is working tirelessly to make good on our promise to the working people who built our nation to deliver historic tax cuts and reforms, the rocket fuel our economy needs to soar higher than ever before. Now, as you all know, the president is preparing to leave the country tomorrow for a 5-country, 10-day trip to Hawaii and Asia. This afternoon, we have with us the president's national security advisor, General McMaster, who will preview the trip and take some of your questions. Please keep your questions on topic. If you have other questions, the press team will be around this afternoon and throughout the next 10 days while the rest of us are on the road. Thanks so much, General McMaster.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hey, good to see everybody. Tomorrow, President Trump embarks on his longest foreign trip to date and the longest trip to Asia by an American president in more than a quarter century. This trip is a great opportunity to demonstrate America's and the Trump administration's commitment to the Indo-Pacific and our efforts to strengthen long-standing American alliances and expand new partnerships. The president has actively engaged leaders in the Indo-Pacific this year to address a range of strategic issues, including, most notably, the North Korea nuclear threat. Since taking office, President Trump has placed 43 calls to Indo-Pacific leaders and conducted bilateral meetings with Japan, South Korea, China, India, Australia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore, and Thailand. This historic trip will build on that ongoing diplomacy. The president's trip will focus on 3 goals. First, strengthening international resolve to denuclearize North Korea. Second, promote a free and open Indo-Pacific region. Third, advance American prosperity through fair and reciprocal trade and economic practices. The United States remains committed to the complete, verifiable, and permanent denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. President Trump will reiterate the plain fact that North Korea threatens not just our allies South Korea and Japan and the United States. North Korea is a threat to the entire world, so all nations of the world must do more to counter that threat. That is happening, but the President recognizes that we're running out of time and will ask all nations to do more. In particular, the President will continue to call on all responsible nations, especially those with the most influence over North Korea, to isolate the North Korean regime economically and politically, to convince its leaders that the pursuit of nuclear weapons is a dead end and that it is past time to denuclearize. And he will remind friend and foe alike that the United States stands ready to defend itself and our allies using the full range of our capabilities. The President will also use his trip to promote his vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific region. The President will make the case that respect for freedom of navigation and overflight, the rule of law, sovereignty, freedom from coercion, and private enterprise and open markets is the best model to increase prosperity throughout the region and to secure the freedom and independence of all nations. And of course, increasing prosperity of the American people is always one of President Trump's top priorities. Throughout the trip, the President will stress his commitment to free, fair, and reciprocal trade. He looks forward to working with partners across the Indo-Pacific region to ensure that governments do not unfairly subsidize their industries, discriminate against foreign business, or restrict foreign investment. This will help increase trade, reduce unsustainable deficits, and promote prosperity for the American people and the people of the Indo-Pacific region. A final point, and a point that's often overlooked, this trip, like all the President's engagements with foreign leaders, builds on previous accomplishments and on previous diplomatic efforts. One example I'll provide is that in Riyadh in May, President Trump delivered a historic speech to the leaders of more than 50 Muslim-majority nations. The President will interact with many of those same leaders at APEC or ASEAN, both of those conferences. He will reiterate three key U.S. counterterrorism pillars that he unveiled in that speech in Riyadh. First, deny terrorists safe havens and support bases. Second, cut off their funding. And third, discredit their wicked ideology. I think it's time for us to recognize that there's been significant progress on all three fronts. Raqqa and Mosul have been liberated and will soon no longer control territory and populations, as the United States has worked very hard with allies and partners to deny that safe haven and support basis, in this case to ISIS. Second, we should recognize that there's been considerable progress on terrorist financing. As you saw Secretary Mnuchin's visit to the region last week, during which he opened the Terrorist Financing Targeting Center. And then also, you've heard a lot of leaders across the world, and the President foremost among them, discrediting this ideology, this Islamist or Takfirist or Salafi jihadist ideology. And last week, I think it's worth reading Saudi Crown Prince, the Saudi Crown Prince's speech, during which he called for a return to moderate Islam. At the ASEAN 50th birthday party in Manila, the President will discuss how to strengthen partnerships across the Indo-Pacific to further efforts against transnational terrorist organizations. So this trip is an opportunity to build momentum towards shared prosperity and security, and I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you. We'll take, yes, toward the back there.
General, as you look at the tools in your toolkit for confronting North Korea, how much thought are you giving to putting that country back on the American list of state sponsors of terrorism?
Okay, that is an option that's under consideration, and so the president's cabinet is looking at this as part of the overall strategy on North Korea. But a regime who murders someone in a public airport using nerve agent and a despotic leader who murders his brother in that manner, I mean, that's clearly an act of terrorism that fits in with a range of other actions. So this is something that's under consideration. And you'll hear more about that soon, I think. Yes, in front of the center.
Let's do a couple here. Will the president be using the fire and fury rhetoric in his speech about North Korea when he's that close to the border? Will he be meeting with Putin on the sidelines? And will he be bringing up human rights when he meets with Duterte?
Okay, so the president will use whatever language he wants to use, obviously, and what the president has done is clarified in all of his discussions, his statements on North Korea, our determination to ensure that North Korea is unable to threaten our allies and our partners, and certainly the United States. So he's done that with a great deal of clarity in the past, and I'm sure he'll do that during the trip as well. And that's been of great reassurance to our allies, partners, and others in the region who are literally under the gun of this regime.
We shouldn't expect any modulation in the language because of where he is.
Well, I don't think the president really modulates his language. Have you noticed him do that? I mean, he's been very clear. He's been very clear about it. And let me just talk about this quickly. I've been aware of the discussions about, hey, is this inflammatory? No, what's inflammatory is the North Korean regime and what they're doing to threaten the world. I think there would be a grave danger if that regime didn't understand our resolve, the president's resolve to counter North Korean aggression, and the president's made it very clear. Yes.
On the Putin and the Duterte.
Is there a likelihood during the course of this 12-day trip that additional multilateral sanctions will be announced pertaining to North Korea? And the second question I have has to do with China. In your view, General, are they doing enough to apply pressure on the North Korean government?
So on those questions, what you've seen is a concerted effort to isolate North Korea economically, and that's been combined with a major diplomatic effort that asks all countries to do more. There's tremendous momentum behind that now, and we've seen countries across the Indo-Pacific region, but globally, doing more to expel these really, in effect, North Korean slave laborers who are a big source of income for the regime, to shut down a lot of illicit trafficking that was aimed to circumvent UN sanctions, and then also to shut down a lot of the money-making enterprises of this regime, oftentimes run out of their embassies. So you've seen a lot of expulsion of ambassadors, elements of the diplomatic corps, a restriction on this kind of activity, and the president welcomes that and appreciates it. But we'll also be asking others to do even more there. So it is both diplomacy and sanctions working together. China is definitely doing more. But obviously it's not enough until all of us achieve denuclearization. And I think what's really essential to remember about China's approach to this is China recognizes this isn't the United States or anyone else asking China to do us a favor. China recognizes that it is clearly in China's interest, in all nations' interests, to denuclearize the peninsula. And that's because of the direct threat from a regime like this with a nuclear weapon, but it's also because of the specter of the breakdown of the non-proliferation regime. And what if others in the region conclude that they have to arm with nuclear weapons? I mean, that's not good for anybody. So I think China will, as it always does, act in its interests. But I think this is an area where our interests are really clearly aligned.
General, you mentioned in your opening comments that the world is running out of time to deal with North Korea. If you could expand on that for a moment. And earlier this week, before the Senate, General Mattis was asked about the process by which the president might use nuclear weapons. And he said, well, if we were to detect a potential launch from North Korea, that is a scenario under which the president might act. Do you agree with that assessment? Has that been something that has been discussed here within the Situation Room where options presented to the president?
Okay. All right, so on the first, on out of time, we're out of time because approaches in the past have not delivered have not delivered on halting and then reversing North Korea's very dangerous nuclear and missile programs. And the approach of the past has been that we'll be happy with something what some people call a freeze for freeze or suspension for suspension. And that's the beginning then of a long drawn-out negotiation process or talks during which the North Korean regime has in the past continued to develop its nuclear capability, continued to develop its weapons. Then upon delivery of a weak, not enforceable agreement, the agreed framework, for example, in '94, what that agreement does is it locks in the status quo as the new normal. And then, of course, North Korea then breaks the agreement and continues with the programs. So we're out of time to do that because of how these programs have advanced over time. So what it's time for is a really concerted effort to do everything all of us can to resolve this short of military action. In terms of scenarios, the president's always very clear. He doesn't draw red lines. He doesn't forecast directly or say directly what he's going to do. But what he'll do is he'll do whatever it takes to protect the American people and our allies.
I only raised that because
overseas.
General Mattis said it in open Senate testimony.
Yeah, and so what is clear is that the United States will respond with all capabilities available to North Korean aggression, and they're appropriate to that scenario.
Something that might be happening.
Gentleman in the center in the back. Yes.
Thank you, General. There have been stories coming out of North Korea and certainly parts of that part of the world that the North Koreans have targeted the president in different ways. And are you confident about his security? And have you heard any of the rumors about the targeting of him by Pyongyang?
Well, whenever the president travels, our team does an assessment and will secure the president. And we have extraordinarily capable forces in the region. And so that's routine for us, is to take all that into consideration.
How do you assess President Xi now that he has consolidated his power? Does it make it easier to deal with him on North Korea or harder?
Well, I think what the president will do is build on what was already a very strong personal relationship that they developed at Mar-a-Lago, and then also that build on a very substantive policy dialogue we had, especially on the security side, in Mar-a-Lago and in meetings since then, at the G20, for example, and in multiple phone calls between President Trump and President Xi. And I would highlight three elements of that foundation for the U.S., Chinese, really the multinational approach to North Korea. The first of these is a recognition that North Korea is not just a threat to the United States. Remember in the old days you'd hear, well, this is really a problem between North Korea and the United States. Well, everyone acknowledges, China especially, that this is a problem between North Korea and the world. The second thing that's really critical is the universal